Hey, everybody, Off the Mic Sports Network here. So an interesting bit of news and an interesting quote from Rob Van Dam on his podcast. He had a chance to, and if anybody's, qualified to talk about, extreme spots in wrestling, it's Rob Van Dam. He was an ECW champion, one of the originals of that brand. So RVD on his podcast talked about the spike spot in the John Moxley Adam Copeland match from a couple weeks ago, and he basically more or less said it makes him want to be more associated with WWE than AEW. Remember, RVD has shown up on both He's now in the WWE Hall of Fame. He showed up, did a couple matches with in AEW. I think a year or so ago. When I think he was going to face Jack Perry. This was a couple years ago, and it was cool. They got the Pantera song that he used to come out to, which was great. But RVD on his podcast basically said about the infamous spot that we've talked about here a lot on this channel. He said, quote, "That's not wrestling to me. Obviously, it's sacrificing a lot for the business. I mean, that could be said about it. But the more AEW has been doing stuff like that, the more personally I feel like I would rather be associated with WWE than AEW." He said a couple years ago, it was like, man, they're growing. They're trying things to get up there. And then there's a feel that the inmates are running the prison. So RVD is spot on. And I saw so many AEW geeks and fans saying, man, RVD doesn't know what he's talking about. He was in ECW. Guys, RVD was not doing crazy shit like this, okay? Like one of the craziest things RVD was doing was kicking trash cans into people's faces and, landing on steel chairs and stuff. Like he was not, going to these lengths. ECW did a lot of crazy shit. They didn't do what John Moxley did. Like I've never seen a spot like that on North American television. And there's been a bunch of times that AEW's done that in the last couple of years where I felt they went too far. I went on this channel last year during All Out, and I said there was a couple spots at that show that were a bit much, and they did way too many of them. But the difference there was the story led itself in a couple of those matches. There was a John Moxley thing with his heel turn that I didn't like because I thought that was unnecessary. But there was stuff that they did in a steel cage, Willow and Chris Statlander, and that was fine. But you mean, and then there was a blood and guts match where, they had an unprotected chair shot to the head and they were lighting people on fire. And I was like, okay, it's they're trying to get people to quit and they're trying to do crazy shit. I didn't necessarily think you needed to light somebody on fire, but okay. But then we get to what this was, for the world title. What do you need to prove there because, Spike is, Cope's weapon of choice? What are we doing? Like RVD, if there's anybody who is qualified to talk about this shit, it is him. And, just because he says he doesn't want to be associated with AEW because you did a crazy spot that was completely unnecessary, you could have gotten your point home without doing that spot. The reason why we remember that spot is because of how gratuitous and gruesome it was. And it was to me, it's one of the most unnecessary things I've ever seen in wrestling. And I've seen a lot of things that AEW has done, but at least I could see some validity in what, AEW was doing with some of the other spots that they did in 2024 and 2023. And some of the spots that they've done in their previous hardcore and, death match type spots, because it's like, somewhat like a story was, like built into something like that. What was the story here? We already saw that Cope and Moxley, like there was no real heat behind it. It was kind of like manufactured heat because they were trying to, create a challenger for, Mox and Cope. And, they had a match. It had one of the worst finishes we've ever seen, and they tried to compound it by doing something even crazier. Listen, what I will say about spots, and I've said this on this channel consistently, is like spots are fine, but if there's no rhyme or reason to it, then why am I supposed to care? Because, something gruesome and violent and something I've never seen before is on television? No. And I'm not even saying that they should have done that even if there was a story led into that. There's no reason to do that, period. It's It's way over the line. It's way unnecessary. And when you're losing somebody like a Hall of Famer and a guy who knows something about extreme wrestling in Rob Van Dam, that's when you've lost and you've completely jumped the shark. And AEW, in a lot of ways, has completely jumped the shark with a lot of things that they've done because they just think, okay, like we're a niche product and we need to appeal to the sickos. But RVD is right in the fact that is not wrestling. That is not why people get into the business. That is this mud show slop, indie-rific crap that doesn't belong on television for consumption. Let's not forget there are children who go to these shows and they saw that. Imagine if you are a parent and you took your kid to an AEW show. First of all, that's your own choice, and whatever. I mean, and you saw that spot. That's just not okay. You have to understand that there is a certain limit. And also the other thing about RVD and people being critical of him, what RVD was doing, which wasn't even close to some of the shit that was going on. I mean, there was some crazy shit going on in ECW, but RVD wasn't doing stuff like that. He wasn't doing stuff like that. And you just like the stuff that was going on 20 years ago in RVD or 25, 30 years ago in RVD's heyday, that's not what is normal in 2025. What was normal in 1995 through 2000 and the crazy parts of the Attitude Era, so there's a lot of stuff that you wouldn't be able to get away with. And the fact that they tried this, even though I maybe they did, maybe I'm missing something because, like I said, I'm not exactly the biggest expert on ECW stuff, but everybody dismissing this as a non-story, it's disrespectful. A Hall of Famer's given his opinion, you know, just no matter how you feel, just because he's standing up against your product and saying, hey, WWE is safer. And it's just, you don't need to take unnecessary risks like this. It makes you look amateurish. It makes you look bush league. It makes you look like a sloppy shop. And it's just like I've been saying this since the spot happened about 10 days ago. That it's one of the most unnecessary risks that I've ever seen. And if something had gone horribly wrong, who's to say what could have happened to John Moxley? I know it's his decision to ultimately take that spot, but that also comes down to like you need to stand in the way of your talent, and that's on Tony Khan. It's like, listen, your talent could say they're capable of doing anything because what are they supposed to do? It's like they want to put the risk on the line for themselves, but like that doesn't mean you have to okay it. And in a world title match with next to no build and just being thrown together for a street fight in a random match on a random dynamite, you did need to go to that length. And that's all RVD is saying. And that's literally what I've been saying for 2 weeks since this happened. So anyway, thanks so much for watching. We'll have a lot more here on the channel, a lot more sports content, a lot more wrestling content. I will see you guys soon. Bye-bye.